A couple of months ago, when I was a part of the advisory board of Schizophrenia Research Foundation, they had a program called First Episode Psychosis. I came across this wonderful mental health advocate, and I immediately could see certain alignment in terms of our values and the way we talk about mental health advocacy. And I immediately decided that I'm inviting this person for our podcast. And we have here Aditya with us, and he is just one of the most authentic, honest voices that I've come across in real life in a long time. So, welcoming you, Aditya. Can you share your introduction?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for such a warm introduction. I feel very flattered to be held in such esteem. So hi everyone. My name is Aditya. This is my first time doing something like this, so sorry if I'm a bit rusty, I guess, or too brand new. Anyway, I my name is Aditya. I am a mental health advocate and food blogger type situation. I don't know what to call it, but I'm in the food area. But yes, I think my first love will always be mental health advocacy, and I work very hard to try to dispel a lot of the stigma and a lot of the preconceived notions that people have about mental health and mental illness, and just want to make it easier for so many people like me to live our lives on the planet. So before this, I was running an organization called the Tapestry Project, and in that capacity, we ran support groups for people with BPD and also a general support group for young people in India today, talking about their issues and really feeling seen and heard by each other. So it was a wonderful community, and today I'm here on this lovely podcast, and I really look forward to having a great conversation with Srishti.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for sharing your journey. And I'm really excited to go more into the depth of this conversation. So, I always ask this to people, whenever I come across a mental health advocate, the first question is, what's your why? Why you got into this? Because, except for the fact that it is a glorified mainstream conversation now, thanks to social media,
Yeah.
there's I feel the best mental health advocates have a bigger why, So, what's your why? Why did you get into this space? What inspired you to set on this journey?
So my why, I guess, is that I have been there before, right? So I have lived experiences with mental illness, and I'm sure we can dive into that as we go. I'll keep the suspense going. But right, so I have lived experience with mental illness, and I've seen how it really does affect people on a molecular level. And so I really felt like there was no voice for myself at the time. And so now I kind of want to amplify my voice to compensate maybe. But what really matters to me more is just creating a voice for so many people who maybe don't have the resources that I do, or maybe don't have the platform or the connections that I do, and really just speaking up and being loud and obnoxious about it. So yeah.
I think we need that more unapologetically. What you are saying is obnoxious. I think it also comes from a deep space of being apologetic, because these are heavier conversations, and usually people don't want to go beyond the frill and the fluff of, oh, do self-care, use mask sheets, use like a 10-step skincare. People don't want to go deeper into that subject. So when you are a mental health advocate who wants to speak with layer, nuance, and just all aspects of it, then I think there are lesser takers. So sometimes we end up feeling like, oh, we are taking up too much space.
Yeah.
So we're using these compensatory words. But I think it's absolutely essential what we're doing. And thank you so much for, whatever initiatives you've taken, because things that are born out of lived experiences are, I think they're pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I hope, the great thing about, yes, so I feel that the best part of content creation, it lives beyond you. So even when we're long gone, I just hope that someday someone with certain lived experience, they find this video and they are able to feel heard and feel seen. yeah, so that's definitely the purpose of this podcast, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're having me on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of gratitude we're both feeling definitely for this conversation. Um, Earlier you chose to, you know, create the suspense, and I'm so grateful for the suspense value. But also, could you share um, the lived experiences that you were speaking about earlier? What was that like for you, and what uh, was there a diagnosis involved? Were there other people involved, or is it your own narrative and journey that you're speaking of?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to preface for everybody listening, Srishti has been so kind. She's already vetted all these questions. So, I'm very comfortable talking about this kind of thing. So, I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And for me, it's just been this like endless journey of understanding myself and getting other people to understand me, and then in turn understanding other people. So it's a real cycle, and it's a really weird cycle at times, but it is something that on a strange level that I'm sort of grateful for these experiences, because you feel like they've taught you a lot. Obviously, you wish that you had learned those lessons in a nicer way, but the lessons have taught me a lot and changed my life in a big way. So I guess here we are.
Right, absolutely. So, what, how did it start the journey of perhaps seeking out a diagnosis?
So, I mean, so first off, I think a diagnosis is not always going to be the right thing for everybody. Right? There are so many different limitations and different restrictions on how to get a diagnosis. But for me, it kind of came out of a little bit of necessity. I was in school at the time. I just started like I guess senior secondary, that sort of vibe, and I remember it so well. So the big turning point was the day before my economics board exam. I had a complete mental breakdown, right? So I was like grabbing ceramics and breaking them on the floor, and I was like, you know, just completely destroying myself in the process. So after that, I ended up skipping the board exam, which in India is like, I don't even know what.
The biggest deal.
Yeah, you skipped a board exam.
Yeah.
Good luck having a future.
Yeah.
So I ended up skipping that, and then going back to school the next week and stuff. It was just kind of a slow decline almost, where I ended up dropping out of math and another big Indian no-no, and then I eventually dropped out of school, right? And it became about how can we get this guy some help? How can we help him understand himself and just do better and be better? And so, sorry. So the first step that we did was I ended up meeting a very lovely counseling psychologist who really guided me a lot and helped me understand what trauma was, and a lot of the great work there. Then once the problem sort of ballooned, I did end up meeting a psychiatrist, and she has really changed my life in so many ways. And she is the one who kind of bestowed upon me the diagnosis when I turned 18. And it's been a roller coaster in a way, when you get diagnosed with something like BPD and you make the mistake of going online and you realize that, like, oh, I might be a monster, right? And
I'm so sorry that.
yeah.
I'm really sorry that a lot of the spaces online can be negative, condescending, dismissive of you. And I think that when you are so young, when you're 18 or 19 and you're diagnosed with a personality-related issue, when you're trying to form your identity and navigate a diagnosis,
Yeah.
then hearing all these voices that keep telling you that, oh, there's something, in a very overly pathologized way, in a doomsday kind of a way. I think it's very difficult to kind of shut it out and then just focus on you finding your own core values, your own identity, and
Yeah.
feeling more stable and secure in them, when there are so many voices that you're hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's actually kind of interesting is that when I first sort of was online, kind of gauging interest about what BPD was, sort of understanding it, I was not hearing the doctors or the psychologists or the psychiatrists or any of these people talking about it. You hear from people whose lives have been affected from it, right? And the stories will shake you up. You will hear about people with BPD and how they feel like they've lost all hope and they're in this dark space. You hear people who are, related or connected to people with BPD, and you hear all types of stories there. And that really shakes you when you're trying to figure out your place in your world, like you said, and trying to understand who you are, where you fit in, and hearing that this really complex take on your life being prescribed to you. It's really, it doesn't bode well for the psyche. So, but the pathological side of things that you were mentioning was actually something I encountered a lot with my work at Tapestry, right? Where I was rubbing shoulders with psychologists and psychiatrists and, LinkedIn, the bane of my existence. But, you see people talk about borderline there, and it's like the problem starts from the top. The people who came up with the diagnosis don't empathize with it. So how can we expect people who have zero understanding of the diagnosis to have empathy for it, right? So the conspiracy, how far it goes, is something to be ratted out and vetted. But yeah.
I definitely think that social media can be a space where we access powerful stories. Like, let's say, if at that young age you'd come across the profile of someone who is a spokesperson, a mental health advocate, who's really worked on their issues, who's like perhaps been in therapy, etc., and they take real accountability for their actions and the impact they have on others, etc. So I think that could have been a very powerful thing to come across.
Yeah.
But because I think the dominant voices on social media are fear-mongering, are sensationalizing, are minimizing or explaining things without nuances. I think that it can definitely be scarring, and so I feel that generally for anyone who's listening, who it could be BPD, it could be anything else, and if you have lived experiences of mental health struggles, then pick very wisely the accounts that you follow. And you don't have to listen to even every mental health professional. I'd go as far as that. Like, I would say that, and some of my colleagues might be like, "Oh, is Srishti speaking against the mental health community?" But I would be honest, just unfollow, or you don't have to subscribe to, discuss, or just take in those narratives that are shaming or fear mongering. Follow mental health advocates or people with lived experiences, or psychologists whose voices are affirming and genuinely the ones that seem empathetic and caring, instead of like the holier than thou, I know better than you,
Exactly.
how dare you exist, like it almost sounds like that. And I feel that way too when I look at that content. I feel like, how are these people, if they have such strong negativity within themselves regarding a certain a disorder, then I don't think it's possible that it's not going to impact the treatment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that brings me to a point, perhaps, how has your experience been? So this brings me to my question to you, that for you as a person with lived experiences of BPD, what were some of the red flags and the green flags in mental health professionals that you came across? And you were a mental health advocate, so I'm sure you've met, and I know you were a part of the advisory board at SCARF, and I know that organization was absolutely wonderful, where I think one of the first areas of discussion for us was, even though in this space there are psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and mental health advocates who are not formally educated in, so like the mental health stuff, there will be no hierarchy.
Exactly.
That was such a beautiful thing that they did.
Yeah, it was a real breath of fresh air.
I think that's how we need to take into consideration every stakeholder, right? But coming back to my question, it is, you come across a lot of mental health professionals probably. So who were the mental health professionals? What qualities did they stand for? The ones that you've stuck with, the ones that have helped you immensely, whether it be you took consultations with them or whether you follow them on social media, etc. What kind of voices did they have? What helped specifically with examples? And who were the mental health professionals whom you found to be like, slightly like disheartening, or people whose voices felt critical and perhaps too pathologizing or too minimizing or too dismissive, or and I really believe people have experiences of that,
Yeah,
of these
absolutely.
things with their mental health professionals. So
Yeah.
yes, so I guess to summarize, what helped you in certain mental health professionals and what didn't help you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tell this story to everybody I meet, but the most powerful mental health professional I've ever met was I was undergoing treatment at the Center for Intensive Treatment of Personality Disorders in New York, and a wonderful psych fellow, or he was a postdoc or something, I don't know, but he was in charge of my group therapy and was also my individual therapist. And I remember so I sort of had this recurring symptom where I was dissociating a lot, right? And, I was kind of in and out of different planes, I guess. But for me, I would kind of take on like a character almost. And so in those moments, I would not feel like myself. I would feel like that character in someone else's body, right? And it was obviously very jarring. But I remember that after feeling very invalidated with my treatment team here in India, going there and talking to this therapist, and I told him I was feeling like this, and I told him that the character was from a certain TV show and stuff like that. The very next session, he said, "Hey, I watched 2 episodes of that TV show. I intend to finish the whole thing, but I totally see why you relate to her, right? And let's talk about it. Let's just engage. Let's talk about everything that character has been through, and let's just spend an entire session talking about that." And that to me felt like, wow, this person actually cares
Right.
about what I'm going through, and is not concerned about, hey, is this dissociative identity or is this identity diffusion? He just sees something that's affecting my life and wanted to understand it.
Right.
And that to me was like, wow, psychologists can be good people, So it meant a lot to me in that moment. And, just as another thing, when we spoke about red flags, I don't want to make it seem like the psychiatrist that I went to before, the one who was rather invalidating and pathologizing about this, they weren't, I'm so sorry. They weren't like critical towards me, It was just that in that moment, it felt very invalidating, right? So then when I moved back from the US and I started going to the psychiatrist again, it felt like the relationship was stronger. The therapeutic relationship was stronger. And it's actually really, really, I don't mind speaking about this because, especially with a mental health professional, because, I think when I was in the US and I was still receiving treatment from my psychiatrist in India, there was like a bridge period. And during that time, I remember so vividly that I was going through a horrible, horrible mental episode, and I really cussed her out, right? Like I laid into her. The F word was dropped a lot. And she said, "Hey, I'm going to just drop the session. Good luck to you." And she kind of distanced herself. And then I didn't speak to her for 2 years. And then after that, in 2 years' time, when I moved back to India, I reached out to her, ate a bunch of crow, and I said, "Hey, I'm so sorry for that." And she said, "Come meet me in September." And then I met her in September, and it just felt like the relationship was that much more stronger for it, because she now understood me completely, and I understood her completely, because I know that, hey, this is someone whose boundaries are so rigid and are so strong that there's no way that I can like mess with them. And she's going to enforce those boundaries. And when someone enforces boundaries that strongly, you learn to respect them for it, whether consciously or unconsciously, I think. And so that was a really great experience where it was just like, do we need to start over? So when someone enforces their boundaries really strongly, you do learn to respect that person, right? Because that person is telling you very clearly that I am not to be messed with. I'm not the one for you to toy with, right? And that made me learn to preserve the relationship a lot more. And it helped me respect her as a mental health professional a lot more as well. And
But
yeah.
how did it feel when there was, I think, perhaps when one has personality related struggles, then boundaries are not, something your internal experience of boundary setting by another person that's so strong.
Yeah.
It can feel like this person doesn't give a damn about me, this person hates me, this person doesn't love me. I mean, even if my mental health professional is holding such a strong, is dismissing me almost. I think, how did you navigate that? What did you feel in that moment when that happened? And what allowed you to go back to her 2 years later?
Sure. So completely agree with what you're saying about people with personality related struggles, because I definitely speak with a lot of hindsight, right? And so I know that, hey, in that moment it really precipitated into XYZ feeling today. So ever so often I may do that. But anyway, so in the moment it felt horrible, right? In the moment it felt like it just felt raw. It felt extremely raw, because it was like, wow, this person who, and obviously this is not the right thing to say about a mental health professional, but this person who I pay to take care of me, right, doesn't even want to do that, right? And so you feel really ugly in your mind because you're having these types of thoughts. And then you feel shame about those thoughts, because like, why would you say that about someone whose job it is to care for others, right? So then you have all these feelings that cascade onto themselves. And in that moment, it just felt like there was no more opportunity for me in the world, right? So I actually ended up going to the hospital at that time for a psych hold, and it was a whole thing. But essentially, I think, I mean, going back to her was a decision that I made because I knew that I kind of made it because I knew that I didn't want to start again with someone, right? Explain all of this to a new psychiatrist. So I kind of made it out of just like the feeling of, hey, who do I know in the city that I can go back to? But I'm so glad that I went back to her. And Doc, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry for what happened. But overall, I think going back to her gave me a lot of strength for myself, because it made me realize that, like, hey, you can make mistakes, and as long as you're willing to fully take responsibility for it, other people will learn to give you the respect for taking responsibility, right? But you can't take responsibility out of the want for respect. You have to take responsibility because it's the right thing to do, right? So I mean, I told her, I was like, Doc, you have no compulsion to see me again. I don't want you to feel like, you owe me something. Obligated, exactly. So to me, it was just like, hey, if you want to not even reply to this message, you have every right to. I was really rude to you. But she did. And she said, see me in September when you're back. And I saw her in September, and we've been best friends ever since. No, but it's been a great therapeutic relationship.
I can, right now you guys can't see his expressions, but I can see genuine gratitude for that therapeutic relationship that you've shared. So if this happens to someone who is, like, let's say a younger version, or someone who's just experiencing this sort of a very rigid boundary setting by a mental health professional with you, which I think, when we try to understand personality related issues, we also notice that sometimes the tendency might be on the client's part to push back on those boundaries, or to handle it like an attack on their sense of self, right? So if this has, I completely think there are horrible mental health professionals out there.
Yes.
I'm as a mental health professional, I would say this, and I know I can get some flack from my own community, but I'm going to say it because I'm invested in this process beyond just, like being an echo chamber of, validating certain people. Um, so let's say, first of all, what made you realize that no, this is a person who's worth going back to? Second, if someone is in that state where a very rigid boundary has been set with them, and they might feel like it is an attack on their sense of self, or the therapist does not care, or they're cold, unloving. So what now, as your older, wiser version that's gone back to the same person after 2 years, and still has a great therapeutic relationship with the said person, what would your advice be to someone who is in a different stage of their healing journey?
Yeah. So if you are coming up against a mental health professional who's laying out very clear terms of engagement, right? And I think every mental health professional should be doing that, right? Whether it's talking about a specific type of trauma or talking about certain experiences, I think every mental health professional should know very clearly before they even get into the game that this is what I want to help people with, and this is something I can't help people with, right? So communicating that to your patient or your client is really important. If you are coming up against such a boundary that's being enforced with tact and skill, you're going to want to push up against it, right? That's just a given. You want to see if you can push and test it. Exactly. And you're going to want to like see how far you can get, kind of, and I don't even think it comes from a malicious point of view.
I don't believe that's how it is.
Exactly.
Especially in the case of BPD, I don't think so.
Right, exactly. It's like, imagine if the only way I can describe it, or I'm visualizing it right now, is that like, someone put a pillow between you and another person, and you want to go and hug that person. You're going to want to climb over the pillow to give them a hug, right? And so when you're trying to do all that, it does feel like a lot of work, right? But if it's a mental health professional whom you trust, right? And if it's a mental health professional whom you have any semblance of respect for, right? You need to know that they are doing it out of concern for you, right? Because more often than not, a mental health professional who is talking about a boundary is doing it obviously to take care of themselves and to tend to their garden, but it's also because they know that if they are feeling their boundaries violated, they will not be able to care for you adequately, right? And I think that knowledge is there for a lot of mental health professionals these days. And I think that's an amazing sign, is that like, hey, I'm not going to be able to show up for you in the right way if you cross this line with me. So I'm going to ask that you don't, right? So I think just knowing that and being like, you know what, if I mess with this person, then they're not going to feel comfortable with me. That knowledge is really important. I think that comes from having a lot of empathy for yourself and working on that to learn about yourself. But I'm sure we can get into that at some other time.
So in summary, if someone is in a different stage of healing and they are feeling almost discarded or, rejected, by their therapist, while they overall trust and respect the professional, in summary, you're saying that you take your time. Obviously, you're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling.
Yes, of course.
But slightly reflect on your own pushing of the boundary.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. All right. So, and in the first stage before the 2-year part, right? What made you trust the therapist when they were holding such strong boundaries?
What really made me trust that therapist was, or
the psychiatrist.
What really made me trust the psychiatrist was that I really believe that she wants me to be better, and that is what is so encouraging, because, she just, the way that she also spoke to my family is a really big thing, right? And, India, family structure, all that kind of stuff, we don't have to get into that right now. But, the way that she would sit with my parents on end and just sort of talk to them and tell them that, like, hey, this is what this medication does, or this is what this diagnosis would mean. Hey, try to keep them offline, try to do this, try to do that. The way that she would guide us through the process, it really made me believe that, like, hey, she's not here to turn a quick buck off me.
Right.
She wants this person to get better.
Yeah.
And she had so much faith in me to go out and do things that it just made me feel like, okay, if I have her in my corner, then I can do whatever I need to do, right? And I think every mental health professional should sort of aspire to that, where it's like, wow, when a client says that, hey, I got them on my side, I can take on the world. I think that is really, really powerful.
I absolutely agree. I think it's very, very important for mental health professionals to hold that space and also psychoeducate your family, because without, I keep saying this, like an individual who's struggling very acutely, they're as strong as their family is.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with what you're saying. So, and what exactly happened in those 2 years? What was the inner reflection? What was that journey in those 2 years that allowed you to go back? So that trust was there, of course, but what were the specific pointers of self-reflection that allowed you to do that?
I love that question, mostly because it is painting such a vivid picture in my mind of like a block of ice thawing, right? Because it literally is like, in that moment, I wanted nothing to do with my psychiatrist. But over time, as healing was taking place, I was realizing that, like, wow, there is no such thing as black and white. There is no such thing where I was the aggressor and, she was really hurt, right? But that's like one school of thought. But there's also a school of thought that's like, hey, she instigated and that pushed me, right? And there are all these complexities of right and wrong and morals and ethics, but like at the end of the day, two people ended up hurting each other, right? And so I watched myself get healthier, and I realized that, okay, I need to at some point own up and tell this person that I hurt them and take accountability for that, right? And being able to, and I realized that, like, and my therapist at the time in the US told me this. She said, hey, the fact that you are willing to go back to India to right past wrongs is proof that you don't need me anymore.
Right.
And I was like, work, I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So it was really, really amazing to see, like I remember it so well. This therapist, she told me that, hey, when you told me that, so I told her that I wanted to move back to India, right? She said, the day that you told me that you wanted to move back to India, I wanted to actually check if you were having a manic episode. And I was like, oh, okay, why? And she said, oh, I was genuinely concerned about your reality testing. And I was like, oh. And then I realized that, like, wow, I really wanted to come back and own up and I guess this is so cliche, but like do the work of like righting those past wrongs and helping out people. And I think that was such a big step for me.
Absolutely. So I'm really, really glad. And so basically, you were with a psychiatrist in India, and then you were in the US, and you got treatment with a really good therapist that you trusted, the one who saw the anime show to relate to you better. And, in the course of that work, you kind of realized that, okay, you know what, like, that person was not evil or bad. It's just that, they had my best interest while also safeguarding their interests, but they also knew, the professional, that you could understand that them holding that boundary is kind of reinforcing this to you also, that you come meet me here. I'm not going to come and fight with you. I'm not going to ask, I'm not going to validate that behavior. I'm not going to attack you in a response, or, it's not going to be a fight. It's going to be, I'm here and you come meet me here. And in many ways, I think, if you're afraid that, like, I've made certain mistakes, when I was having a low phase, or I snapped at someone, or I hurt someone, perhaps at some point, probably the frame of reference for this relationship is quite powerful, that I can go and just, kind of fix it. Because when we're trying to understand personality related issues, one of the key things that we see is that the person engages into certain behaviors that sometimes they themselves can't see how it's impacting others, but others can clearly state that, okay, this part of this person hurts me. I love them so much, but these are the points where I feel that, sometimes they are not realizing to what extent they're hurting me, etc. So I think that's why a good, powerful therapeutic relationship is so important, because it's a microcosm for the macrocosm of your life in terms of relationships. Right. So this perhaps brings me to the next question. How have you navigated the relationships in your real life, your friendships, and perhaps cousins, relatives, people you share space with, etc. So, how have you dealt with some of the challenges in those spaces? Because uh, sometimes it can feel very intense whenever there is any sort of an issue, like where some average person might be like, there's like if there's an issue, they might just take a break from that relationship.
Mhm.
Half an hour later they come back fine after drinking a glass of tea, or having
Yeah.
coffee in a cafe.
Yeah.
But for you it can be like, there's extreme whirl of emotions sometimes internally.
Yeah.
So how have you navigated some of the struggles and the challenges of your interpersonal relationships?
Okay. So first thing I want to say is that I didn't want to interrupt you while you were speaking, but it wasn't an anime, it was a TV show about a superhero.
Oh.
No, I'm such a nerd.
I'm so
I just wanted to
sorry.
correct you. No, don't apologize. It's just that I wouldn't have been able to sleep tonight if I was like, guys, it's about it's a superhero show.
Okay.
But I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I felt really weird correcting you on that. But yes, but your question about interpersonal relationships. One of the biggest learnings that I had from DBT, right, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, was that your emotions are like a wave, right? They build up and they possess a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
And when they land, they can just destroy everything in its path. But at some point, a wave will crash back into the ocean, and then the ocean is still the ocean, right? So what you're talking about, that whirl of emotion within yourself, right? The first step is to say, you know what, this doesn't last. You feel this way now, give it an hour, give it 2 hours, it will start to dissipate on its own, right? Especially if you can cope with it, drink some tea, like you said. It really works for me.
Yeah.
So, relax and sort of just find safety in your surroundings, right? But navigating interpersonal relationships is the title of my memoir, mainly because I'm really bad at it a lot of the time. I'm really, really blessed and really lucky to have people in my life who have put up with an incredible amount of crap from me. And being able to go back to those people and saying that, like, hey, this is where I have messed up, and this is where I've gone wrong. And these are the ways that I've hurt you. I understand that these are the ways that I've hurt you, right? When you show someone, and I know this is true because when people do this to me, I feel like I can trust them more, right? When someone comes up to me and says, hey, I understand that joke I made, or that, that extra physical touch or whatever it was, right? I know that made you uncomfortable. I know that hurt you. When they make that acknowledgement and they apologize for it, or they take responsibility for whatever they've done, that makes me feel like, oh, this person is well adjusted. This person wants to preserve the relationship, right? And I think fundamentally, what is so powerful about my relationships today is that these are people who kind of waited for me, right? Because I feel like when you're in therapy, you are not in space-time, you're kind of in your own little bubble.
Yeah.
Especially intensive therapy, right? When you're meeting someone like 5 days a week, you are in a completely different time zone, and so you will lose a lot of people in your life during that time. And so having these people who are like, you know what, I know you're worthy of love and I know you are a good person, come back to me when you're ready to show me that side of you. Game changer. Game changer, because to me it was like, wow, not only does this person have faith in me that I can get better, but they're also showing me that there is something about me that is worth loving and worth
holding
protecting
on to, no matter
and
what.
worth holding on to. Exactly. So I think I hope that everyone has that in their life. And I know so many people don't. And for those people, what I would say is you have to become that person, right? You have to become, because I know so many people with BPD who are in really trying circumstances with family, with friends, with loved ones. And to them, I say, you are the only friend you have, and this is true for everybody. But with people with personality struggles, a little more true in that the only friend you have at the end of the day is yourself. So you have to be so kind, so understanding, so loving, and so accountable to yourself the way you would be to a healthy friendship.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the only way that you're going to live at peace with yourself. Otherwise, I mean, forget it on some level. So,
how does one really tell the difference between a healthy versus unhealthy friendship? I think now you're in a phase of your healing journey where you're so clear, you're like, I think your clarity of thoughts is like immense. But when one is actively dealing with the symptomology and they're in an earlier stage of healing, right? So things can be pretty messy, like sometimes because the chaos within us seeks the chaos within others and other people who are quite chaotic, right? So how was that journey like for you, where like where you started to differentiate people who were genuinely in your corner, would wait for you, would hold you accountable, but continue to love you and not use that. I think one thing I appreciate is I think people with BPD, they have great capacity to sit with the darkest aspects within themselves. It might not seem like that initially, but I think deep down there's a very sensitive, very self-aware person waiting for the right relationship to bring it out.
Exactly.
Right? So I think they have so much value to add, and I think relationships are so essential to them, and they add so much value into the lives of the people that they love. And that's, I think, their highest self. That's their best version, that it can be that way, because there are a lot of wonderful people who have become mental health advocates, such as yourself. And there's this Instagram page I follow, I'm forgetting the name right now. They've also started, creating these communities and groups, and they do wonderful advocacy work, So I definitely believe that there's a potential there for so much growth. But when one is in an earlier stage of healing, where everything feels extreme, everything feels black and white, every time someone does something, it feels like an extreme rejection of the self, So how does what would you say to that person in order to differentiate healthy versus unhealthy friendships? Because there are a lot of people out there. They are dysfunctional as well. And but they don't want to sit with their dysfunctionality. They don't want to face their inner chaos. They don't want to work on themselves, and they would rather oversimplify things and say, oh, this person is bad. Oh, this person is, let's say, in an oversimplified way, this person is toxic, or this person is dysfunctional. So they would rather drop you than kind of have that conversation, hold you accountable, and love you once you show up with accountability, right? So you need the other person also to be giving you that chance. But there are many people who don't want to. They want a great friendship on a silver platter where it's quite easy and simple, right? So how to tell the difference between a healthy person, an unhealthy person, a good relationship space versus a relationship space that can be bad for you in the bigger picture? Like, for example, so BPD is also associated with a chronic sense of emptiness and loneliness from inside, right? So if you have that sense of emptiness and loneliness, you might associate with, please correct me if I'm wrong,
Sure.
but one in an earlier stage of the healing journey, they might like people who are available 24/7. But a person who's available 24/7 might not be a person who's well adjusted either, because everyone, a healthy person is going to have their own friend circle outside of that one person.
Exactly.
They are not going to, constantly be doing substance abuse to fill empty voids of time. They are not going to, they're not going to do so many things, right? They'll have a purpose, they'll have an identity. They can't be available 24/7 permanently. But when you have that void within, right, you might want people who are available 24/7 all the time, right? So only dysfunctional people can be available 24/7. So how does one navigate healthy versus unhealthy friendships?
Okay. So to me, it is about, it's actually a lot about that void that you mentioned. I'm really glad that you brought that up, right? Because for someone with BPD, or I'm going to stick with someone with BPD right now, filling that void becomes your life's mission, right? Whether you do it with substances, whether you do it with reckless behavior, whether you do it with, relationships, whatever you do, you just want to feel whole again, right? And so that leads us down a path with other people interpersonally that it's very hard to walk away from, because misery loves company. It's my
Yeah.
favorite saying, right? Misery loves company. It loves to be, drama loves drama. So I think the least healthy relationships you'll ever be in are the ones where your chaos has matching points to their chaos.
It's kind of like if
Mhm.
Joker and Harley Quinn, like
Yeah, exactly. Right? No,
Yeah.
that's so accurate, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, your chaos and their chaos are so intertwined
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
where, and I feel sad almost because, for a lot of people, myself included in the past, it was like, we're twin flames. We were meant to be with
Yeah,
each
exactly,
other
yeah.
because, when I'm having a bad week, she's having a bad week, and we support each other, and that would be healthy.
It's us against the
Right.
world kind of
Exactly. And you feel like that is healthy,
Yeah.
but it's not.
Yeah.
Because neither one of you is actually getting better. You're just two pigs in a sty. You're both rolling around in mud. Like,
Yeah.
get out of the mud, So getting out of the mud in the first place, having someone who can pull you out and say, you know what, I understand that you're feeling like crap today. I have some time. Let's watch a show.
Yeah.
Let's play a game.
Yeah.
Let's go out. Let's do something with our lives, And then when you return that favor, right? But there will inevitably come times when both of you need to roll around in the mud,
Yeah.
right? But I think the awareness of saying that the mud is not the only place to go,
Yeah.
and knowing that, like, hey, this was fun for like 10 minutes. Let's go, like,
Yeah.
get
do other
out,
things, yeah.
right? That is really important.
Yeah.
You cannot be in a relationship where it's like, hey, just 5 more minutes in the mud would be so nice.
Yeah.
So get out of the mud. That's the name of the episode.
Can you
Yeah.
give examples of what's the mud for you?
Yeah. So for me, the mud is self-destruction.
Yeah.
Very plain and clear. Substances, reckless behavior, reckless spending.
Taking leaves from your job just
Yeah.
to stay in like twice a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think there's this modern phraseology of self-preservation mode,
Yeah.
right? I think that's it serves a purpose, but when it becomes malignant almost,
Yeah.
that's when it becomes mud to me,
Yeah.
right? When you're like, you know what, like, I think for so many people, we cope with unhealthy things, right? Some people cope with alcohol, some people cope with drugs, some people cope with,
even reckless sexual behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. So we cope with all these different quote unquote vices.
Yeah.
And when it becomes our only way of dealing with life, right? And when we brand it as taking care of ourselves, we're bringing ourselves some joy in this crazy world.
Yeah.
We are sinking, we're lost. And we all deserve and need someone who's willing to say, hey, let's take a shower and let's get out of here. And I'm really grateful to have those people in my life.
How could you identify them? Can you just give some examples of where, so like, let's say if early on in your journey, a part of you wanted to be in the mud, how did someone kind of say, hey, you're in the mud, come out, let's go face the sunshine, for example. What were some of those kindness related behaviors that you saw?
I'm so glad I'm on this podcast. It makes me think about so much. It's like, this makes me think about all the good things in my life that I don't think about on a daily basis. But so I think the big thing about that was, I remember this one time, it was around the time that, God, I hope I didn't just muffle the audio by doing that.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I remember this one time I was just feeling miserable, right? And I wanted to wallow. I wanted to while away my time. I was just not paying attention to anything. I mean, I don't partake in any substances, so that wasn't my experience. But, I was reckless. I was messing around, and I was just sort of screwing up good things with my friends and family. And I remember this one friend of mine, she came in and she said, it was actually a dose of reality, right? So I'm not going to act like this is some like rose-tinted event, right? I was clinging on to her for dear life, right? And she said very plainly, she said, go fix yourself and then let's talk again in 2 months, right? And that was literally like, I'm not going to wash you off. Go face the sunshine out of the mud and then come back to me, right? And there are some friends who will take you by the hand and they'll like care for you and they'll like wash you off and scrub you down and like This mud analogy is really getting out of hand. But really, it's like they will literally care for you like a baby, right?
But sometimes that can be enabling, sometimes, it's like, ultimately we all want to be functioning adults, so
Exactly.
capable of, taking care of ourselves and, I mean, I'm not saying that, sometimes when something extreme is happening, no one should come help you out, but if it becomes a pattern where each time something happens, you need someone and you want them to drop their entire lives, their families, their commitments, priorities, jobs, and each time come and rescue you, each time you feel like you're feeling slightly low or something is not going away, then that again is an unrealistic expectation. If someone is meeting you there again and again, they'll start resenting you.
Exactly.
And perhaps it will lead to ugliness in the relationship.
It always leads to ugliness in the relationship, because you get the person gets tired of meeting you there, and then you learn that you can take advantage of someone by saying, hey, I'm kind of down, and then they will drop everything and come give you attention, right? It is enabling to the self, to our worst parts of ourselves. And so I would say that the best way to overcome all that sometimes is having a friend or having a parent or having a sister or a brother who is going to say, listen, you are in a mess right now, right? I'm here for you. You want to do something constructive, let's do it. But destructive is not on my agenda, and it shouldn't be on yours. Right? It's as simple as that, right? And for me, it was actually really funny, not funny, but for me, it was like a little different, because I felt like I was thrown into speed drive, right? Because this friend of mine essentially said that, hey, we need to go no contact, because I was really leeching, right? So she said, hey, no contact, I just cannot be in your life right now. Right. And
I think it's so powerful that she said right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it takes a lot of like self-work to say that right now I can't deal with this version of you. And if you work on yourself and you come back, I'll meet you wholeheartedly and I'll embrace you. I think, but if that is missing in a person, if they're saying that, oh, you're useless, you're worthless, you're a piece of shit, I really don't think that is a conducive relationship. And anyone who's listening, so if you have people who are shaming you, criticizing you, see, sometimes, when you're emotional, you can perceive boundary setting as shaming you. So you need to learn to segregate that from someone who's genuinely an established well-wisher. When they're saying that some behavior of yours is hurtful, you need to work on yourself. And I'll be waiting for you on the other side of it. Right? So I think that's very, very powerful. I think there's a lot of content on social media where you see that people are like, like there's a lot of like victimizing narrative of, oh, the friends who abandon you are so and so, they're the narcissists of the world, this and that. So I think you need to cut that noise.
Exactly.
And I think one can actually sit down and make a list of, categories of people, like people who are blatantly the kind of people you need to have very rigid boundaries with, where you don't want to accommodate that person in your life because they are just judgmental and they perhaps enable you or bring out the worst in you, and your relationship doesn't go beyond, like, let's say, smoking up every other day, for example, very common way of coping up these days. Right? So that can be one category, that no, these people are enablers, they bring out the worst in me, I bring out the worst in them. No. And then there can be a category of people who are absolutely safe, people who are like, whom you almost admire and respect, that these people are navigating life well. They have the value systems that I stand for. And I wish to imbibe their qualities more. Almost. And they're compassionate, they're gentle, they're loving, they're not judgmental and rude and critical. But yes, they have boundaries, and I aspire to have those boundaries as well. So that category. And then there's a gray category. This is an activity I always do with my clients. I make them sit down and write it on a piece of paper and have it with themselves, especially if they have if their opinions of people and themselves keeps fluctuating, this activity really helps. So the third category would be gray people, people who actually love you, but their insecurities can, or their unresolved issues keeps impacting the way they are showing up for you. So this can be a mother, it could be a father, like they want to be there for you, they love you, but they're a stakeholder in your life and you're a stakeholder in their life, and so, like, let's say if you are struggling with something and they say that, oh, like the typical parental dialogue, go out in the sunshine, go exercise, do this, and you're having a bad day, right? So when you say, I have gone the entire week, today is a weekend, I don't feel up to it, I want to have a lazy day. And then they come in and say that, they say big things, that this is why this is happening with you.
Yeah.
Like, how will the future will be better? They're there, it's laced with their fears.
Yeah.
Right? But they mean well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that, and majority of the people in our lives will be from the gray area. There'll be very few people in the second category where they are fully like, on the side where they've really worked on themselves. They're also going to mess up, but not colossally.
Yeah.
People in the gray areas might sometimes mess up colossally, but you have a lot of faith in them that they have wellness in their heart for you. And then the first category are people like complete cut off. You need to move on in order to heal.
Exactly.
I mean, recently I was talking to someone. They have been diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome as a result of their anxiety and chronic mental health struggles. So earlier they had been a part of a friend circle where the friend circle would assemble every weekend, play video games for hours on end, and cannabis was a big part of that circle. And when this person started to kind of acknowledge that, oh, I have certain mental health struggles, when they started seeing a psychiatrist, perhaps because things had started to like go really out of hand, like to the point of having panic attacks, etc. So the mental health profession said, you know what, no, you need to cut this out, any substances, because otherwise you're not getting better. So when this person started taking actions in that direction, this friend circle was like, you've changed,
Oh, God.
you don't care, you're not one of the boys anymore, you're not you think you're too high-headed for us, right? So now these are spaces where people need to kind of disband, not think as a group, and actually work on themselves individually before they can come back and have a healthy relationship. So if this is where you're at, I would say it's best to cut these people off.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me, thinking about the gray area that you said, right, I think what's really important to realize is that if we are not perfect, we cannot expect other people to be perfect.
Absolutely.
Right? If we want to be considered people who can stumble and mess up and stuff like that, we have to expect the same for other people.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I think, but there are still things that for us, we have to draw lines. We have to be very clear about, is this getting in the way of my happiness, my health, or my understanding, right? And so a lot of the time that can look like misusing substances, right? It can look like misusing relationships. It can look like misusing sex. It can look like misusing, money even, reckless spending is such a huge thing, and at the end of the day, like if you have a friend who the only way you two connect is like to go out shopping or like go out to a fancy restaurant or something, and like every time you go out becomes a big expense in today's day where we're all struggling, right? That's not a healthy relationship either, right? If they're not willing to meet you at a decent middle ground, you're not working with each other, right? And I think that working with each other is really, really important, right? And I think it's really, it's nice, I think there's a big deficit of niceness in today's world, right? Just being able to say, hey, let's just do something else, right? I have learned this the hard way with this aforementioned friend who cut me off, and then I kind of got back into their life, where I would say, hey, let's go out here, let's do this, right? And they wouldn't want to do it. I used to take that really personally, right? And I would make a big stink about it. But now I realize that, I have things that I don't want to do. She has things she doesn't want to do. And helping me think outside of my little bubble of life, that is a wake-up call that everyone needs, right? And so, like you mentioned this friend of yours who has like this group, right? And so, I mean, if even one of those friends had said like, hey, no problem, let's just hang out somewhere else, right? Let's like, I don't know.
Let's change the routine.
Let's change the routine,
exactly.
Right? Let's just do anything else. Just about anything else, right? Let's have a jam session, or I don't know, right? Let's do something else. Even one person could have changed,
been so powerful.
Could have done anything, right? It unlocks a lot, right? But unfortunately not, right? And I think that's a case that 99% of people are going to be in, where they are subjected to that sort of thinking, right? And to be subjected to that thinking, the only remedy is to know that I am capable of facing things alone.
Yeah.
Right? Because, and I used to say this when I was in the support groups a lot, is that no one has your back like you have your back.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you were, I mean, humans are social animals, we love it, we know it, but without the ability to stand up on our own 2 feet and say, you know what, I can walk on my own, I can do this on my own, I can bide time for at least, a couple months or weeks of alone time, right? That is strength, right? That is the ability to say to yourself that, you know what, worst comes to worst, I am still going to live by my morals and my values when all the noise is not there. And I think that's just what it is at the end of the day.
So can you give me some examples of I think people talk about values a lot, but how to what are your values and how did you recognize them? How was it? How was perhaps earlier when you were in the earlier stage of healing, how do you think you violated your own values and morals and boundaries? What you set for yourself, the standard that you abide by ideally. Do you think you cross those thresholds from time to time because you felt emotionally dysregulated or certain things like that? Do you think that happened?
Oh, of course it happened.
Okay.
Right? I think it happens to everyone, regardless of diagnosis.
That's true.
Right?
That's
true. It happens to everyone where your own lines get crossed and you feel like shit about it later on. Right? But I think, so for me, I take a shot every time I say the word powerful, but one of the most powerful things for me that happened was the therapist that I mentioned earlier, who said about moving back to India manic episode, that whole little anecdote, right? She ran through the ACT values exercise with me. That was like life-changing stuff, right? So, highly recommend it. Ask your mental health professional if ACT is right for you. But, it was so eye-opening, right? Because sitting down and doing that exercise, it was like, wow.
Can I just add something here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
For the average listener, ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. So, you can look it up. Just clarifying that is the full form for anyone who's not.
No, thank you so much. I get so caught up because all I do is talk about this. I meet strangers on the street and I'm like, have you heard the good news about ACT? But yes, but I did this exercise and it basically, the values exercise for the uninitiated is a list of 64 qualities or something. I think it was 64. But essentially, you sort through that until you get to your top 6.
Yeah.
And then those top 6 values are essentially, you have to live in alignment with them. And if you're not living in alignment with them, that's basically the root of all your problems, right? And so sitting down and realizing that I was not in alignment with my values, right? I was living a life that was not, I still vaguely remember them. I mean, obviously they change every hour, that's just a fact of life. But I realized that I was not living a life that if I had to retell it to someone, I would be rooting for myself, right? So we talk about it a lot, about being the hero in our story or being the villain in our story. We don't have to be the hero or the villain. We just have to be a character that we want to watch or we want to read about. Exactly, right? Yeah. We just want to be the kind of character where it's like, yeah, okay, they're cool. Yeah. They're a chill person, right? Yeah. And so...
And I think, if we are trying to change a narrative from being really in a mess and... we're trying to shift straight away to a hero kind of a position.
It's not going to happen.
It's a very unrealistic expectation, and there's no need to be a hero. You just have to be good enough in your own eyes, and I think that's so powerful.
Exactly. Because, I mean, I say this all the time, but it's easier to get to neutral than it is to get to good, right?
That's true.
And I think a lot of mental health professionals need to hear this.
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't matter if you're experienced or not, it doesn't matter, because I think a lot of typical Western influenced psychology is predicated on the opinion that I'm going to take you from bad, I'm going to make you good, right? Whether you're unhealthy, I'm going to make you healthy again. Whether you are, doing social bad, I'm going to make you do social good. It's based on a carceral approach. It's based on justice, right? And so when we sort of dismantle that and we say, let's get to a point that we are not affecting, right? We're not affecting ourselves.
When you're good enough.
Yes, when you're good enough, exactly.
It's not like you're going from, let's say, it's not an extreme journey. It's just,
Yeah.
I think,
Mhm.
this whole I think society is obsessed with heroism,
Yeah.
and I think it's like because of the morality based principle
Mhm.
that we're so obsessed with, as
Yeah.
like collectively we want to be idealistic, we want to be worshipped. All of us
Yeah.
have that small part that would like to be put on the pedestal.
Exactly.
So we are chasing that herohood,
Mhm.
right? So I think that that is a another, that can be another pathological thing also.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
be very deluding also.
Mhm.
So I definitely think that try to be a good enough person, and the good enough person within you emerges through sticking with your value systems,
Exactly.
the exercise that you mentioned,
Mhm.
and also surrounding yourself with people who hold you accountable to those value systems,
Yes.
whose value systems are compatible with yours.
Mhm. Mhm.
So these things are definitely very, very important and
Yeah.
essential.
Mhm.
So, we've already spoken for 1 hour, 5 minutes, and we were.
Let's keep going. I could be here for the rest of the day.
Yeah, so I think it's going rather surprisingly well. I mean, I expected it would go well,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think more than the questions that we had kind of enlisted, there are more things that have come up.
Yeah.
Okay, so now coming to, you were trying to give a message to mental health professionals, right?
Yeah.
So, as someone with lived experiences of uh, being diagnosed with BPD, like, what messages would you like to affirm to them? Not like in a multifaceted way in their
Okay.
practice, but also the way they're showing up on social media and speaking on the subject.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. In your practice, I would say, actually, first off, I want to say, if you are a mental health practitioner with a social media presence, I kind of feel like, why have you done this to yourself almost? Because it's like, it is hard enough having to show up to a session and doing it authentically. And then you go into social media, which is the least authentic version of your entire life. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like you've signed up for extra work,
Yeah.
You're that kid in class with like, can we have extra credit work?
You know what? Thank you for saying that, because see, I am not like a influencer kind of a therapist.
Yeah.
Definitely, I don't think I have the skill set to be that person either. But I've been around since a long time, and it does take emotional mental bandwidth to, and especially if you're trying to navigate it mindfully and not mindlessly chase every trend, everything that comes up. It just takes time. It takes efforts. It takes self-reflection. You want to not. You want to be careful in the way you communicate, and that's
Yeah.
a consuming task. So I think you're probably a rare person who kind of addresses that is extra work, because otherwise it's like quite glorified in today's time. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people, when they're looking for mental health professionals, they're taking the name and Google searching
Googling it,
their profiles and everything. And when a therapist is not on social media anywhere, they're like, suspicious. But no,
Yeah.
actually, if we go by the traditional way of practicing psychotherapy, therapy should not be.
You shouldn't even know your therapist.
Yeah.
You should be going to therapy through a sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
The boundaries are supposed to be that strong.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think what really, you mentioned trends, right? I really strongly believe that you cannot be trendy and also be in a caring position, right? For anybody.
Yeah.
Because a trend by nature is fleeting and care is supposed to be sustained.
Permanent, yeah.
Right? And so if you are more concerned about like making a post with like a cool tagline, or making like a reel that boils down information that takes an advanced degree to understand into 3 minutes. I mean, a lot of people say that I'm trying to make mental health accessible, but mental health is by nature accessible because everyone has it and everyone needs to cultivate it, right? What needs to be more accessible is mental health care, right? And the way that we do that is by being good at your job. And to be good at your job, you need to be concerned about caring
supervision,
for
self-reflection, therapy
unlearning.
for your own
Exactly.
self.
Thank you so much. Right? Doing all of that, not trying to position yourself as a voice.
Yeah.
No one wants to be a voice.
Yeah.
Or no one should have to be a voice.
Yeah.
It should be enough that you have patients or clients who you are creating an ecosystem of care with.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is a much more important
powerful thing.
Right? So to answer your main question, I think omitting what you put out on social media, just be a decent human being for once in your life. That's what I would say to people on social media. But in your practice, if you are treating or caring with someone who has a personality-related struggle, right? And this is not just for a cluster B like borderline, it could be cluster A, it could be cluster C, whatever it is, right? If you are with a personality-related struggle person, the first thing I would say is you need to work on yourself, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, as we were talking about before, I think the podcast even started, but it was about holding up a mirror, right?
So just
Yeah.
side note, I don't think I have mentioned this here, but we were just discussing before we started, and I just mentioned how in my observation, people who are on the cluster B spectrum, and especially if they have borderline traits or borderline disorders, they're a mirror. So essentially, if there is any disalignment within you, even though sometimes if they're unhealed, the reaction can be pretty magnified, intense, and it can be like overwhelming, but they are a mirror. If you're not aligned, they're going to hold that mirror up to you, and you have to be forced to look within yourself. So if you're a mental health professional who does not regularly self-reflect, you should not be working with any personality issues for that matter.
Yeah.
Especially so with BPT, because they are going to hold you accountable in their own ways.
Yeah.
And that's honestly how I that's one of the things that I stand by in my observation. Yeah.
So definitely. So I think my big message for people, for mental health professionals, would be keep working on yourself and don't lose hope in your clients. If you lose hope, it's over.
Right.
It really is over, because we respect people who have your training. We respect people who have put in the work to understand us better. And if you, with all of your understanding and all of your knowledge about basically what makes another person a person, say, hey, there's no hope for this guy. How can you expect me to believe that?
Yeah, especially if you're a client or a patient in a vulnerable position already, and the mental health profession is coming from a dismissive stance of they have so and so conditions, or like and also how can they balance out the awareness that see, because it is a chronic thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not like with personality, it's your temperament, it's something that is very core to you, and it's not like a before after you worked and it's gone thing. It's like just the intensity and the behaviors and everything, it starts to heal and it becomes in a very balanced position. But when intense stressors come in your life in the future, maybe you'll not regress to how you were before treatment and before healing, right? But it will still be a struggle at times. And in our culture, people are expecting like a dramatic before after magic, jadui ki chhadi kind of an approach. So how does a mental health professional balance that message that even though it's a chronic struggle, but it's possible to get much more better than where we are at right now? So in your, if you were in that position and you were to communicate the realistic picture that you need to be careful, but you can do much more better in a balanced way, how would you put it?
Okay, so I have to ask you a question now. I'm going to answer your question with a question, right? I have a very polished answer for this question, and I have a very unpolished answer. What do you want to hear?
Unpolished.
Okay, so I have said this to rooms full of doctors way older than me before. A personality disorder is like having herpes, in that it never goes away, but ever so often you will have a flare up and it makes your life hell, right? In the meantime, right, it is your responsibility to be safe to yourself and be safe to others. And I think that's all that we can say to ourselves, to other people. I've been approached by people who say, hey, I have BPD, tell me what to do, right? And I tell them, hey, so this statistic that gets thrown around a lot is, I think, like 30% of people with BPD will no longer meet diagnostic criteria in 3 years, right? Something like that. I think I understand where doctors are coming from when they say that, but those very doctors are the first ones to talk about how diagnosis means nothing, but also means everything. So, like, first of all, figure out a story and a narrative, and then get back to me.
There is a lack of a collective unison between counseling psychologists, clinical psychologist. Like just the other day on my LinkedIn, I saw this lady. She's a clinical psychologist, very traditional, trained in one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. She's like how counseling psychology should be removed from the ecosystem
Okay.
and fully merged into clinical psychology. So
Okay.
that every psychologist should ascribe to that rigid clinical lens of looking at things, while I stand for counseling psychologists and any psychologist for that matter should have a sound understanding of the navigating a generalized issue versus something that's a gray area which can't be fully diagnosed, but it is subsyndromal, like
Yeah,
partially rare.
exactly.
And these people have the risk for developing the disorder, so to recognize that, and if someone has the disorder, to send them to the right professional and help them avail the right resources. So that's where I come from, and I keep saying this to everyone, that please always in your training go to a clinical setup, experience it.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But this lady was like, no, renounce counseling psychology. No need for counseling. No need for other specializations of psychology. It should be merged into one big unit of the superior study of clinical psychology. So I think that there is no I think within India at least there's a lot of like a struggle, a power struggle. There is hierarchy, and there is therapists kind of like fighting with each other, shaming each other. So I'm sure that for the average person seeing all that, witnessing that on LinkedIn and other spaces, it can be pretty jarring.
It's extremely jarring because you will go from a healthy treatment team, right, to me should constitute the person who gives you medicine, the person who tells you how to live your life, and the person who makes you feel like life is okay, right? That's your treatment team, right? So when those three people do not agree on how to do anything, how are you going to get better? That's my very earnest question. That's my very earnest question, because there are so many psychiatrists out there who act like they are the second coming of God, right? And then there are psychologists out there who are dismissive of those psychiatrists, but at the same time
working in the same framework.
And so they don't believe in psychology, but they do believe in psychology. It's like this like Rubik's Cube. And then you're just trying to work, live life, the old thing is basically, it's a disorder when it gets in the way of your life, right? You're trying to help that. And people are busy arguing over whether or not your diagnosis is even a disorder. Keep academic stuff to the academics. Right? Let's focus on treating people.
It's kind of like airing your dirty laundry.
Exactly. It is that, right? And I come up against that a lot, where it's like we want to make in the like vein of transparency, we want to make everything more like universal, right? We want it to be as simple as saying, hey, you know what, person on the street, you can come and talk about X, Y, and Z topic, right? Good. People should have says in the way life is shaped. I also think, however, that academia, and this is my hot take, but academia is designed to be academic. It's not academic by nature, is not applicated, right? It is not applied because it is dense, because it asks questions upon itself, right?
I think I would like to add something.
Please go ahead.
I feel, like a lot of therapists, we realize one thing, that, it's so rigid in our textbooks. Like the therapeutic relationship and, the way it is. There are so many situations you'll come across in your practice where there's no textbook for the situations. How do you navigate it? So much of it is trusting your intuitive ability, staying in supervision, self-reflecting, and perhaps even discussing with your peers what would be the best course of action here. So I think being open to that, and also I think the very experience that in real life, in real practice, it does not look like what it looks like in the textbook.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So that's the very proof of what you're saying. So I completely agree with your point.
Yeah. So I think, when we think about academia and academics and how that impacts the actual practical information that gets given out to people, it's one thing if and I was just talking to my friend about this the other day, but like an Egyptologist, right? Someone who studies ancient Egypt. It's okay if you want to go back and forth on the definition of a mummy, because your life is not going to be affected by that and my life is not going to be affected by that. But tomorrow, if two psychiatrists somewhere are having a conversation about, hey, what constitutes a disorder, right? There is a rumor that and this is the kind of rumors I came up with. I keep up with rumors about the DSM, but there is a DSM rumor that in 6 or something they're going to eliminate personality disorder.
Mention something.
Please go ahead.
So DSM is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual by American Psychological Association, and they they have all the diagnostic criteria and the basis on which diagnoses are made, especially in the American healthcare system.
Yes.
In India, currently another textbook is being followed. It's called the International Classification of Diseases and Disorders. It is by World Health Organization. So
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think it was the ICD or it was the DSM. I don't remember which one.
Yeah.
But there was some rumor that they were planning on eliminating personality disorders altogether, right?
Wow.
And they were going to merge it into I think they were going to merge all 9 of them into something. I don't know. There was some weird thing. And I'm like, how does that benefit the person?
What are you supposed to do with that information?
What am I supposed to do with that information? Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So all I can think about is someone who has been diagnosed for 20 years, right? Going into their office or going into their insurance company and saying, hey, I have X, Y, and Z. And the first thing that they hear is, hey, that's not a thing anymore. My experiences tell me it's a thing, right?
Yeah.
I think it's all gotten out of hand, right? And we need to boil down to the fact that mental health is so deeply personal and it changes from context to context. And the most important thing that we can do as advocates, or the most important things that people can do as professionals, is to learn the context, keep up to date, and care for people the way they need to be cared for, right? If that means going the extra mile. One of my psychologists once took me out for a cake, right? That literally happened. He was like, hey, I know you're really struggling. It's 9 o'clock at night. Come, let's go get cake. And I was like, yeah, let's go get cake. I thought it was so weird.
This is going to be such a debate. I think, some people are really going to raise a question. Yeah,
exactly. Some people, it's not for everybody, right? It's not for everybody. People have very valid concerns about therapeutic boundaries and about at what point do you reach out to your therapist and what point, how involved should your therapist be in your life, right? But that therapist was highly skilled. He knew how to manage the relationship, right? And I don't think I've actually spoken to him since I came back from the US, because
and it's been a while since you've come back.
Yeah, and it's been a really long time. And I reached out to him about Tapestry and stuff. He didn't respond. I hope the best for him, and I hope he's very successful and happy. But I think that's the thing, right? Different people are going to set up their lives differently, and they're going to set up lines differently.
With this, how to kind of understand this. So in one school of thought in therapy, there's the behavioral therapy where it is like therapist just accompanying you to, let's say if you have hydrophobia, if you're afraid of like a swimming pool or ocean, therapist might be there with you, physically in those very informal settings and spaces. So I think such gestures or such moves, I think they are something that certain therapists can do, but usually they're doing it very carefully.
Yes.
On the surface, it might seem like to an average person, the immediate response because of social media, I think these days, is to become jumpy and get offended. But I think it's deeper than that. And, he's maintained the boundary in every other context, every other way. He's very clear on, what he stands for. And perhaps, at that very moment, that act of getting that cake was quite helpful to you many ways in that situation. Right. But it can't become the standard practice.
It cannot. That's something that I'm very clear on, right? Is that at no point can it be what everyone should be doing, or what should be the norm, the norm for me even, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, you're feeling down. Okay, let's go get cake with your therapist. That's not how it is, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes, I remember the context for the cake was that I was feeling so horrible about my future and about how life is not worth living. And I remember him saying, you know what, if you feel like this, then why am I willing to spend time with you? Right? And in that moment, it was like, I don't know why you want to spend time with me, right? But now I'm like, yeah, he's trying to show me in a, albeit non-traditional way, right, that I can reach out to you.
Sometimes these are very hard-hitting questions. I, overheard, or basically, I don't know where I heard, a therapist had directly asked the client that, you know what, right now you're not behaving like an adult, you're behaving in a childlike way. You're
Mhm.
putting me in a parental position,
Yeah.
and how am I supposed to navigate that? Do you think
Yeah.
that's fair? And this person was pretty like taken, like
Yeah.
suddenly they were like, oh, what just happened?
Yeah.
But then that allowed the person to have insight that in their real life, real time, they're putting
Mhm.
people into that parental role, and they are in that
Exactly.
childlike regress state.
Yeah.
And yeah, so definitely, I
Mhm.
agree with what you're saying.
I am so in favor of non-traditional therapy, right?
Right.
And like, I understand that it's not for everybody, and I understand that it's not the right fit for every disorder. I know, disclaimer.
Yeah.
But I think I like the idea of the therapeutic relationship being a relationship first and foremost, right? Because that's
essentially what it is.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? And I think so often it has become a hierarchy
Yeah.
where it says, hey, I am the one prescribing onto you
Yeah.
what to do in life,
Yeah.
right? What it should be is a give and take,
Yeah.
right? And it should be communicative.
Yeah.
And it should be really honest.
Yeah.
If you're not honest with your therapist, if your therapist cannot be honest with you, then what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Why are you even going to therapy?
Yeah.
If you didn't want to hear someone literally call you out on your crap, right? Because I think it's so silly when we think about authority in that way, where it's like, oh, you're not my dad to say that about me.
Yeah.
If your dad said it about you, who are you, my therapist, to make such a judgment about me?
Yeah.
Your therapist doesn't, God is going to judge you. Like, at the end of the day, you need someone to hold you accountable. Right?
And sometimes, especially if your issues are manifesting in a way that they are slightly overwhelming, like let's say if you're having anger outbursts, or let's say you're depressed and you're having like really suicidal thoughts and feelings, the people in your real life, because they're so emotionally attached to you, they can't maintain that objectivity and without perhaps trying to take a parental role and trying to save you as a child from your own conditions. But that's exactly where a mental health professional comes in, where they are, they deeply care about you. They want to show up for you in the therapeutic context. They really kind of help you out. And when there is of course, see, as therapists, it does impact us when our client is having a bad time or they're struggling.
I'm sure.
It's not like we are robots there, right? Like we're humans in showing up in that space. So we do think of our clients. We do really kind of self-reflect and everything. And it does make us feel certain ways when we can see that a client is, repeatedly either engaging in self-destructive behavior, or perhaps, if they are surrounded by the wrong people. So many people come from highly dysfunctional and abusive families. So we feel strongly, right? But yes, we work on our feelings to channelize it in a way that we can actually be helpful, and we don't become yet another parent figure in a rescuer kind of a way, like where I'll step in and save you each time, I'll step in and save you each time. So that's not the thing. It's like, I'm here, I'm a stable presence in your life while you keep experimenting and finding the rhythm that works for you, and I'm going to kind of guide you through those experiments. And while it impacts us, but at the same time, it won't impact us in the same way as it would impact your mother if you're having a suicidal thought. Or like, let's say your best friend or someone else who's interacting with you through the lens of their own fears and insecurities.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we therapists, we really try to discuss our fears and anxieties in supervision space, so that we can tackle and address them, and that shouldn't become the baggage for the client. So that's what we're trying to attain.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I mentioned all of this.
No, I'm glad you did. I'm so glad you did, because it reminded me of another anecdote, right?
Yeah.
Where that same therapist who watched the show for me, right? He had this thing and he was known for it across the center, right? If someone was in his office and he said, I hate it here. I can't stand being in therapy. I don't want to do this anymore. You suck. You do this, you do that. He would get up, he would open his office door and he would say, you can leave. No one's holding you here. And people would get pissed. And they would be like, oh, you don't even care about me. Okay, I'm going to walk out. And then they would walk out and he wouldn't stop them. He's not going to be like, no, come back, beta, please. Like none of that, right? And there's none of this, like, there's no, like, infantilizing. You are an adult. You're in the space with your consent. If you don't want to be in the space, you can leave, right? But don't expect me to hold your hand. And a lot of people called him cold. And a lot of people didn't like that. But for me, that framework was so resounding.
So powerful.
Right? Yeah. It was powerful because it was such a powerful framework, because it said to me that, you know what? There are people in this life who are going to be valuable to you, who are not going to suffer you at all. They're going to meet you in your healthiest version, and they're going to want to be with you in your healthiest version. And those are the relationships that are really going to impact your life, right? And that's what it is. You know, that's what it is overwhelmingly when it comes down to what therapy as a microcosm does, right? It teaches you the skills to go about and be the best version of you, right? I mean, this guy, I mean, he was white, and so being able to speak to him and correct him on his prejudices and his biases and being able to guide him through that, it was such a give and take relationship, right? It was
I think that's definitely something we need to accept as mental health professionals, that it is a give and take relationship. You are learning from your client, not to the degree where you are kind of surpassing the the responsibility of being able to help the person, but obviously there's a human being in front of you with from a different cultural background, with a different set of lived experiences. You can learn so much from them, and we end up learning stuff from them anyway, so we need to also be open to that. I think for example, I've learned like a word or two of the modern Gen Z, younger Gen Z lingo, the words that they use. I've learned that from my younger clients. And so yeah, that's a very silly example, but yes, we are definitely learning from our clients. And so I think this conversation has been quite important, and we've touched upon so many nuances of your lived experience as a person with BPD, which is borderline personality disorder, and then the also how a person with lived experiences of BPD, if they're in an earlier stage of healing, how they can navigate that, and also a bit of a critique of the mental health care system. I think it is pretty important, and I feel that the right mental health professionals would hear. I'm not being narcissistic enough to say that, oh my god, mine is going to be the best podcast ever, but like if they are hearing, they're going to kind of assimilate this. They might have disagreements on certain aspects, but some part of it might resonate for someone, and it can help them become better practitioners. Again, I'm not saying that my platform is the highest and better, but
no, I don't think we need to like cushion the statement, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you should believe in that fully. You should believe in that fully, right? That like, hey, you're having a worthwhile conversation. Right? And I want to know that like, hey, people who engage with me are engaging with my ideas and are engaging fully with this, whether they critique it, whether they assimilate from it, whatever. Right? I don't think we should be cushioning our statements.
Okay, fine. Like that, So I just hope like this, the entire information and also the critique of the mental health system, it can help a lot of therapists gain certain insights about their own limitations and become better practitioners overall. So yeah, I'm really grateful we could have this conversation today. In conclusion, I would like to say that if you are someone who suspects they have a borderline personality disorder or a personality issue, etc., if you've gone over some content somewhere, or if you relate to anything that Aditya mentioned today, very honestly and very gracefully about his own lived experiences, please feel free to reach out to a psychiatrist, a clinical psychologist, or the nearest mental health professional available to you, and you can basically just do some research on them, on their work, and if you can see if you generally have that feeling of trust in the person. And I would say that even if the therapeutic relationship gets challenging from time to, so if you basically disrespect the person, like not disrespect, but if you don't trust and respect the person, then obviously you have the right to leave. But if you really love and trust someone overall in the bigger picture, and then they are setting a strong boundary and sometimes you feel slightly disappointed, try to grieve or feel angry. You're entitled to that, but try to stick with the process, because I think on the other side is a life of, I think, like building communities, being genuinely caring, having the capacity to sustain a lot of meaningful and deep relationships that are deeply fruitful and rewarding. So I wish you all the best on your healing journey. If you're looking for any references of a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist or a mental health professional that you would like to know, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram via DMs, or you can access my mail ID here in the description box, and I'll be happy to send some referrals your way. And yes, so do let us know your feedback about this conversation. Thank you so much. And Aditya, thank you so much for joining in today.
Thank you for having me. It means a lot that you wanted to listen to me speak for an hour and a half. So thank you.
No, you did a wonderful job. I'm so glad that you
Thank you.
you were the first guest of, me restarting this entire series. So I'm really
Mhm.
glad it was such a deep, rich, and meaningful conversation. I will definitely have you on, sooner than
Please,
later,
please.
and we can come up with other important topics.
Sure thing. Sure
Okay.
thing.
All right.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Please feel free to leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so that you receive the notification each time I upload a video. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye.